The wind carried dust across the empty streets of the alien colony. The sun was weak behind the thick smoke, and the ground trembled slightly as heavy boots marched closer. People knew what was coming. Shops closed fast. Traders grabbed their goods. Parents called children inside. Nobody wanted to be in the marketplace when the soldiers arrived. But one woman could not leave. She knelt in the center of the square, holding her small daughter tight against her chest. The child was trembling, her thin arms wrapped around her mother's neck. She was only 5 years old, too small to understand why men with guns wanted to take her away. The mother's heart pounded as the sound of boots grew louder. The soldiers appeared, tall in black armor, faces hidden behind masks, their rifles glowing faintly with blue energy. Their leader walked in front, his pale eyes cold and merciless. He looked at the little girl and gave one simple command. "Take her." The mother froze. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please, no." The leader stared at her. "She will serve the empire. That is the law." The mother dropped to her knees, clutching her daughter tightly. "Please, she is only 5. Take me instead. I beg you." Her voice cracked. "Do what you want to me, but leave her. She is just a child." Her words echoed in the marketplace. People stood far away, watching silently. No one moved to help. No one ever helped. The leader smirked. "You think we bargain with insects?" He raised his hand, signaling his soldiers forward. The mother cried louder, her voice breaking with terror. "Please, take me. I will go with you. Just let her live." The child buried her face in her mother's shoulder, whimpering softly. The soldiers reached for them. And then someone spoke. "Stop." The voice was low but carried through the air like thunder. A man stepped out from the shadows at the edge of the square. He looked human. His clothes were simple, dusty boots, a long dark coat, nothing special. But there was something about the way he moved. Calm, steady, like someone who wasn't afraid. He stopped between the soldiers and the mother. The leader's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer right away. His eyes moved slowly over the soldiers, then to the trembling mother and child. When he finally spoke, his words were quiet but sharp. "Let the girl go." The soldiers laughed. Even the leader gave a cold smile. "And why should we listen to you, stranger?" The man met his eyes without fear. "Because if you touch them, none of you will leave this place alive." The laughter stopped. The soldiers looked at each other, unsure. The leader scowled. "Kill him." One soldier stepped forward, rifle raised. What happened next was too fast for most to see. The man moved like lightning. A single strike, precise and brutal, and the soldier collapsed with his rifle torn away. Before anyone could react, the stranger was holding the weapon, aiming it directly at the leader's head. The square went silent. The mother stared in shock, clutching her daughter. The soldiers froze. The leader didn't move. His eyes narrowed, studying this human carefully. There was no fear in the man's face. His hands were steady. His voice was calm when he spoke again. "Leave. Now." The leader clenched his jaw. He didn't like this. He didn't like the way his soldiers hesitated. He didn't like the way the crowd was watching. But most of all, he didn't like the feeling crawling up his spine, the feeling that this human was dangerous. Very dangerous. Finally, he signaled his soldiers to back away. "This isn't over," he said softly. The man didn't answer. The soldiers retreated slowly. The leader kept his eyes on the stranger as he left, as if memorizing his face. The marketplace stayed silent until the last soldier disappeared down the street. Then people began whispering. Who was this man? Why did the soldiers hesitate? Why did he help the mother and child when no one else ever dared? The mother looked up at him, tears running down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice trembled with relief and fear. The man gave a single nod. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. His eyes stayed on the road where the soldiers had gone. He knew they would come back. And next time they would bring more than soldiers. The marketplace stayed quiet long after the soldiers left. People looked at the stranger with wide eyes. Nobody spoke to him. Nobody even moved close. He stood in the middle of the square, holding the stolen rifle like it weighed nothing. His face was calm, unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, watching every corner as if danger could return at any second. The mother clutched her little girl tightly. Her hands still shook. The child hid her face in her mother's neck, afraid the soldiers might come back. Finally, the man lowered the rifle. He tossed it aside like it was useless. He looked at the mother. "Are you hurt?" His voice was steady, quiet. She shook her head slowly. "No. But they will return. They always do." Her voice cracked. "You should leave before they find you." The man didn't answer. He looked down the empty road where the soldiers had gone. His face stayed cold, but inside his mind, thoughts moved like a storm. He knew the soldiers would not forget this day. Their leader looked like the kind who hated losing. Next time, they wouldn't just come for the child. They would come for him too. But the man didn't plan on running. He turned back to the mother. "What's your name?" She hesitated before answering. "Lyra." He nodded once. "And the girl?" "She's Arya." The mother whispered softly, hugging the child tighter. The man looked at the little girl hiding her face. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened for just a moment. Then it was gone. People in the marketplace finally began to move again. Some came closer but kept a safe distance. They whispered to each other, stealing glances at the man. "Where did he come from?" someone muttered. "Did you see how fast he was?" Another whispered back. "Maybe he's a soldier from the old wars," an old man said quietly. "The kind who fought before the Empire took this planet." The man ignored them all. He walked to the edge of the square where a broken water pump stood. He turned the handle, letting cold water splash over his hands. Lyra watched him carefully. Something about him felt different. Dangerous, yes, but also controlled, like a weapon locked away until someone made the mistake of waking it. She took a cautious step closer. "Why did you help us?" she asked softly. The man didn't look at her. He washed the dust from his face, the water dripping down his jaw. "Because someone had to." Lyra's hands trembled again. "You don't understand. They work for the Empire. They will come back with more soldiers. You should leave while you can." The man finally turned to face her. His eyes were like stone. "I'm not leaving." She stared at him, shocked. "Why? They'll kill you." "Let them try," he said simply. There was no anger in his voice, no fear, just a quiet promise that made her chest tighten. She wanted to argue but stopped herself. He didn't look like a man who changed his mind once it was made. The child, Arya, peeked out from her mother's arms to look at him. Her big eyes were still wet with tears, but there was curiosity in them now. She had never seen anyone stand up to the soldiers before. The man met the child's gaze for a brief moment. Something unspoken passed between them. Then footsteps echoed from the far side of the marketplace. People stiffened. Lyra pulled her daughter close again. But it wasn't soldiers this time. It was a group of locals, miners, traders, a few farmers from the edge of the colony. They looked nervous but determined. One of them, a man with dust-covered clothes, stepped forward. "We saw what you did," he said carefully. "No one ever stands up to them. Not here." The stranger didn't respond. He just waited. The farmer swallowed hard. "Who are you?" The man looked at the ground for a moment, then back up. "No one," he said simply. The farmers exchanged glances. Lyra spoke softly behind him. "He saved us. He saved my daughter." The locals looked at each other again. Their faces showed fear, but also something else. Hope. The stranger turned his back on them all. "Go home," he said. "Stay inside tonight." The farmer frowned. "Why?" The man checked the stolen rifle before setting it down near the well. His eyes scanned the horizon, sharp and cold. "Because," he said quietly, "they'll be back." His voice carried across the silent square. Everyone felt a chill when they heard it. It wasn't just the way he said it. It was the way he stood there, calm as stone, as if he had been through this before, as if he knew what was coming next. The sun had almost disappeared behind the mountains when the sound of engines came again. People in the colony froze. The soldiers were back. This time there were more of them, heavily armed, riding on armored vehicles that shook the ground. Their black armor gleamed under the fading light. The leader from before was with them. His pale eyes burned with anger. He hadn't forgotten the man who had humiliated his soldiers in front of the whole colony. And this time he wasn't here for the child. He was here for revenge. The marketplace emptied fast. Doors slammed shut. Lights went dark. People hid in their homes, peeking through cracks, praying the soldiers wouldn't come for them. But everyone knew something was different tonight, because the man was still here. The stranger didn't run. He stood near the same well in the center of the square, waiting. His long coat moved gently in the cold wind. His face showed no fear. Lyra held her daughter inside a nearby house, heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to scream at him to leave, to save himself, but she knew he wouldn't listen. The soldiers marched in, rifles raised. The leader walked slowly toward the man, a cruel smile twisting his face. "You should have left, human," he said, his voice dripping with hate. "Now you die." The man didn't move. "Leave the colony," he said quietly. The soldiers laughed. The leader raised his hand. "Kill him." 3 soldiers stepped forward. The man moved first. Fast. Too fast. Before anyone could blink, he grabbed the first soldier's rifle, twisted hard, and slammed the man to the ground. A second soldier aimed his weapon, too slow. The stranger was already behind him, kicking the weapon away, his elbow smashing into the soldier's helmet. The third soldier charged with a blade. The stranger caught his arm mid-swing and threw him over his shoulder like he weighed nothing. 3 soldiers down in less than 10 seconds. The leader's smile faded. The stranger stood still, breathing steady, eyes locked on the rest of the soldiers. "Walk away," he said. But the leader wasn't going to stop. "Not now." "Fire!" he screamed. The soldiers raised their rifles. The stranger dove behind the water well as energy blasts tore through the air, burning into walls and sending sparks across the ground. The colony shook with chaos. People screamed inside their homes. The man moved through the shadows like a ghost. He rolled behind a cart, grabbed a fallen rifle, and returned fire. He wasn't aiming to kill yet. He was aiming to scare, to break their courage. 1 soldier fell, his weapon destroyed. Another screamed as a blast hit his leg. The leader snarled, "Surround him. Don't let him escape." But the stranger wasn't running. He was hunting. He moved with deadly precision, using the darkness, the buildings, and the soldiers' fear against them. Every shot he fired sent them scattering for cover. Inside her house, Lyra held Arya close. The little girl trembled as explosions lit up the night outside. "Why doesn't he run?" Lyra whispered to herself, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief, because deep down she knew this man wasn't afraid of dying. The soldiers regrouped, forming a line across the square. The leader stepped forward, furious now. "Enough games," he shouted. He raised his rifle toward the house where Lyra and Arya were hiding. "Come out, human," the leader growled, "or I burn the building. Let's see if you're so brave when they scream." The man stepped out slowly, his weapon lowered. His face was calm, but his eyes burned cold. "Leave them out of this," he said. The leader smiled darkly. "Then give me what I want, your life." For a moment, silence hung in the air. The soldiers waited, ready to fire. The stranger stood tall, eyes locked on the leader. "You don't want my life," he said softly. "You want a war, and if you keep pushing, you'll get one." The leader laughed. "One man against the Empire? You're mad." The man tilted his head slightly. "No," he said. "I'm worse." The wind blew dust across the square. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed the leader's face. The stranger's calm was not the calm of fear. It was the calm of someone who had seen far worse than this, and survived. Someone who had killed before, and someone who could kill again. The leader hesitated. His soldiers shifted nervously, waiting for orders. The man didn't move. He just stared, silent, dangerous, like a storm waiting to break. And everyone knew this fight was far from over. The soldiers left that night, but everyone in the colony knew they would return. The leader had looked angry, almost afraid, when he finally ordered a retreat. He hadn't expected one man to fight his entire unit and live. Next time, he wouldn't make the same mistake. The stranger stayed in the square long after the soldiers disappeared into the darkness. His coat was torn, his arm bleeding where a blast had grazed him, but he didn't look like a man in pain. He looked like someone thinking about the next move. Lyra came out slowly, holding little Arya close. Her hands trembled as she walked toward him. "You should leave before they come back," she said softly. The man didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the road where the soldiers had gone. His face was calm, but there was something in his silence that felt heavy, like he had carried it for years. "Why are you helping us?" Lyra asked. Her voice was quiet, but there was fear in it too. "You could have walked away. No one here would have blamed you." The man looked at her finally. "Because no one else will." Those words hung in the air. He turned and began walking toward the edge of the colony. Lyra hesitated before following. She wanted to understand this man, this stranger who fought soldiers like it was nothing, and who stayed even when death was certain. The night was cold. The stars above were faint behind the smoke. Finally, she asked, "Who are you?" The man stopped walking. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "Once, I was a soldier." Lyra frowned. "For the Empire?" No, his tone was sharp. "Against it." He started walking again and she followed. "They called us ghosts," he said after a while. "We fought in places the Empire wanted to erase. We were outnumbered, outgunned, but we never stopped." Lyra held Arya tighter. "What happened to the others?" The man's jaw tightened. "Dead. All of them." She felt a chill at his words. Now it made sense, the way he fought, the way he moved like he had done this before. This wasn't the first time he had faced death. But why was he here now? On this forgotten colony, protecting strangers? "Why stay and fight?" she asked. "You owe us nothing." The man stopped again. His eyes, cold and tired, met hers. "Because I've seen what the Empire does to children. I won't see it again." There was a weight in his voice, a story untold. Before she could ask more, footsteps came from the shadows. The locals were gathering. Miners, traders, farmers, the same people who had watched silently earlier. But now they looked at the stranger with something new in their eyes. Respect. The old farmer stepped forward. "We heard what you said to the soldiers, that if they kept pushing, there would be war." The man didn't reply. The farmer looked nervous but continued. "Do you mean it?" The stranger studied the faces in the crowd. They were tired faces, beaten down by years of empire control. People who had learned to survive by staying silent. But now, there was a spark. "War isn't won by words," the man said finally. "It's won by people willing to fight." The farmer swallowed. "Will you teach us?" The man's expression didn't change. "You want to fight an empire?" "We want to be free," the farmer said. The stranger looked at the mother and child standing near the crowd. Arya's small face peeked from her mother's shoulder, eyes wide and scared. Freedom. He had heard that word before. Too many times. He had watched men die for it. He turned away. "Go home. Stay alive. That's all you need to do." But as he walked off, the crowd didn't leave. One man whispered, "He can fight them." Another said, "He was a soldier. Did you see how fast he moved?" The word spread quickly. By morning, the whole colony was talking. They called him the Ghost, a man who fought alone, a man who had once survived battles that destroyed entire cities. Some said he had killed Empire generals. Others said he was part of a secret unit the Empire couldn't erase. No one knew the full truth. But one thing was certain, the soldiers would come back. And this time, the Ghost wouldn't be standing alone. The sun never rose bright over the colony. Smoke from the factories always covered the sky, turning the mornings into dull gray shadows. But this morning was worse. Everyone felt it. The silence, the waiting, the fear that hung in the air like a storm ready to break. The stranger, the one people now called the ghost, stood at the edge of the square, his coat moving in the cold wind. He didn't speak much. He didn't smile. He didn't even seem to sleep. But his eyes never stopped watching the horizon. Because he knew, today they would come back. And this time it would not be just soldiers. Lyra held little Arya inside their small home. The child played quietly with a piece of string, too young to understand what was coming. But Lyra knew. She had seen the look on the ghost's face. He was a man who had lived through wars. And men like that never looked calm unless they were ready for death. Outside, the locals gathered in whispers. Miners with rough hands, traders with tired faces, farmers with dirt still on their boots. They all came, carrying old hunting rifles, metal pipes, anything they could use as a weapon. The ghost had not asked them to fight, but he hadn't told them not to either. When the first sound of engines came from the distance, the ghost finally spoke. "Hide the women and children," he said. His voice was low but carried across the square. "If you can't fight, stay off the streets." Lyra hesitated. "And you?" The ghost checked the stolen rifle from last night. "I fight." The engines grew louder. Then they came. Not 20 soldiers this time. Not even 30. An entire convoy of armored vehicles rolled into the colony, carrying soldiers in black armor and heavy weapons mounted on top. At the center of it all came the leader from before, his pale eyes filled with hate. The soldiers spread out, surrounding the square. Their boots hit the ground like war drums. The leader stepped forward, his voice like ice. "Where is the human?" The ghost stepped into the open. "Right here." The leader smiled coldly. "You think you can fight the Empire with a few farmers and miners?" The ghost's face didn't change. "I don't need many," he said quietly. "I just need you to stay here long enough." The leader frowned. Long enough for what? But before he could finish, the first trap went off. A hidden barrel exploded near the convoy, flipping one of the smaller vehicles on its side. The soldiers scrambled for cover as smoke filled the square. The ghost had spent the entire night setting traps. Old fuel tanks rigged to blow, wires strung across alleys, walls ready to collapse. And now the whole square turned into chaos. The soldiers fired in every direction. Energy blasts lit up the air. The miners and farmers fought back from rooftops and alleys, using whatever weapons they had. It wasn't clean. It wasn't pretty. But it was loud, messy, and it slowed the soldiers down. Through the smoke, the ghost moved like a shadow. One moment he was firing from behind a wall. The next, he was pulling a wounded farmer to safety. Then he was gone again, reappearing somewhere else, striking like lightning. The leader shouted orders, furious now. "Kill him. Burn the whole colony if you have to." But the ghost didn't fight like a soldier. He fought like a man who had nothing to lose. He threw a flash grenade into the center of the square. Soldiers stumbled, blinded. He charged through the smoke, his rifle cracking with deadly aim. One soldier fell, then another. The leader finally saw him through the haze and aimed his weapon. But the ghost was faster. A single shot knocked the rifle from the leader's hands. Another shot destroyed the vehicle behind him, sending soldiers diving for cover. The people of the colony saw it all. The man who stood alone against an army, who fought with the skill of 10 soldiers, who moved like death itself through smoke and fire. For the first time in years, the Empire soldiers looked afraid. The leader roared with anger. "Bring in the heavy guns." From the last vehicle, 2 massive cannons were rolled out, their barrels glowing with deadly energy. The ghost saw them and knew, if those weapons fired, half the colony would burn. He sprinted toward them as blasts tore the ground around his feet. He climbed onto the nearest cannon before it could aim, tearing wires and smashing controls with the butt of his rifle. Sparks flew. The weapon died in smoke and fire. The second cannon turned toward him, and then the farmers attacked, throwing Molotovs onto its power core. The machine exploded in flames. The leader screamed orders, but his soldiers were falling back now, scattered, confused, afraid of a man who fought like a storm. And through it all, The ghost kept moving, silent and unstoppable. The square was filled with smoke, fire, and the sound of gunfire. The air burned with the smell of fuel and dust. The ground shook as the last of the armored vehicles exploded in the corner of the colony. The people hid in their homes, clutching their children close, praying it would end soon. But it was far from over. The leader of the soldiers stood in the middle of the chaos, his pale eyes glowing with rage. His armor was scratched, his troops scattered, and yet he refused to retreat. "Bring in the command unit," he shouted. From the last transport, a new squad arrived, larger soldiers in heavy exosuits, carrying weapons twice the size of the ones before. Their boots crushed the ground as they marched forward. The ghost saw them coming. He stood near the broken water well, his coat torn, his shoulder bleeding from a shot earlier, but his hands steady as ever. Behind him, the farmers and miners were running out of ammunition. The traps were gone. The smoke was clearing, and the enemy was still coming. Lyra stood near the edge of the square, holding little Arya tightly in her arms. Her heart pounded as she watched the man who had saved them again and again. He looked like a wall between them and death itself. The ghost checked his rifle. Half a magazine left. Not enough. The exosuited soldiers surrounded the square, their weapons humming with deadly energy. The leader stepped forward, a cruel smile on his face. "This is the end, human," he shouted. "You can't fight an army alone." The ghost said nothing. He tightened his grip on his rifle and waited. The first blast came from the exosuits, giant plasma rounds that tore through the ground where he had been standing a second ago. He moved fast, rolling behind a fallen cart, returning fire with sharp, precise shots. 2 soldiers fell, sparks flying from their damaged armor. But there were too many. The ghost ducked behind a wall as another blast tore it apart. Pieces of metal rained down. His arm burned from a near hit. His lungs filled with smoke. He knew he couldn't hold the line much longer. The leader raised his hand. "Burn the entire colony if you must. Kill him." Lyra's heart stopped. She turned to the farmers and miners. "We have to help him." But they were scared, low on weapons, unsure if rushing in meant death for all of them. The ghost stood again, moving through the smoke like a shadow. He fired until his rifle clicked empty, then picked up a fallen soldier's weapon without slowing down. One by one, the exosuits fell, but still more came. The leader screamed in anger, drawing his own weapon, firing wildly at the ghost. A blast caught the ghost across the side, spinning him to the ground. Lyra gasped. Arya cried out, reaching toward him, but Lyra held her tight. The ghost pushed himself up slowly, blood dripping down his arm. His breathing was heavy now, but his eyes were still cold. He moved again, limping but fast, throwing a flash grenade that blinded the nearest soldiers before cutting them down with precise shots. The farmers finally rushed out, throwing Molotovs at the remaining vehicles, attacking soldiers with everything they had, pipes, axes, even rocks. The square became a storm of fire and screams. The leader roared in rage, charging forward with a massive energy blade in his hands. He swung at the ghost, missing by inches as the human rolled aside. They fought hand to hand now, blade against fists. The ghost grabbed the leader's arm, twisting hard, forcing the blade away before slamming his elbow into the alien's face. The leader staggered but didn't fall. He swung again, slicing the air where the ghost had been standing a heartbeat earlier. The ghost grabbed a broken metal rod from the ground, blocking the next strike with a shower of sparks. They circled each other in the burning square, 2 figures locked in a fight while the colony watched in terrified silence. The leader swung hard. The ghost ducked under, drove the metal rod into the alien's side, then ripped the energy blade from his hands. One final strike, and the leader fell. The soldiers froze, seeing their commander on the ground, his weapon gone, his armor cracked. The ghost stood over him, chest heaving, face covered in sweat and smoke. "Leave," he said coldly, "or none of you walk away." The remaining soldiers hesitated. Then slowly, they began to retreat. The people of the colony stepped out of their homes, staring at the man who had fought an army and lived. The ghost looked around at the smoke, the bodies, the burning vehicles. His shoulder bled, his steps were slow, but he stayed standing. He had held the line, but he knew this wasn't the end. The Empire didn't forgive, and next time, they would bring even worse. The square was quiet now. Smoke still rose from the burning vehicles. The air smelled of metal, fire, and blood. Broken weapons lay scattered on the ground. The bodies of the Empire soldiers were being carried away by the few survivors who still had strength to stand. The people of the colony came out slowly from their homes. They looked at the man standing near the well, the one they now called the ghost. He was bleeding from his arm and shoulder. His coat was torn, his face covered in dust and sweat. But he stood straight, his eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting another attack. The soldiers were gone, for now. The Empire had retreated. But everyone knew this was not the end. The Empire never forgot. The ghost turned slowly as Lyra walked toward him, carrying little Arya in her arms. Her face was pale, eyes red from tears and smoke. But she held her daughter close like a treasure she refused to lose. She stopped in front of him. "You saved us," she said softly. The ghost didn't answer right away. He looked at the small child hiding her face in her mother's shoulder. Then he said, "Not for long. They'll come again." Lyra's voice shook. "Then what do we do?" The ghost looked around at the people gathering in the square. Farmers, miners, traders, men and women who had lived under the Empire's shadow for years. They were tired, hungry, afraid. But now there was something new in their eyes. Hope. The old farmer who had spoken before stepped forward. "We don't want to hide anymore," he said firmly. "Teach us to fight." Others nodded. "We'll learn. We can help. We can build weapons, set traps, whatever it takes." The ghost stayed silent for a moment. His eyes moved over the faces of the people, the homes blackened by fire, the children clinging to their mothers. He had seen this before on other worlds in other wars. He had watched villages rise against armies. He had watched them fall too. Finally, he said, "Fighting isn't enough. You need training, supplies, allies." He paused. "You need a chance to win." The farmer frowned. "Will you help us?" The ghost looked at Lyra and her child again. Arya was watching him with wide, curious eyes now, not afraid like before. Something in that look, it reminded him of why he had picked up a weapon long ago. He nodded slowly. "I'll help, but you must be ready. Once this begins, there's no going back." The people murmured among themselves. Some looked scared. Others looked determined. Lyra stepped closer. "Why do you do this?" she asked softly. "Why risk your life for people you don't even know?" The ghost's eyes went distant for a moment, like he was seeing something far away. "Because," he said finally, "once someone fought for me when no one else would. I lived because of them. Now it's my turn." Lyra didn't ask more. She just nodded, holding her daughter tighter. The ghost turned to the farmers and miners. "The Empire will return. Next time it won't be just soldiers. It will be warships, bombers. You need to be ready before that happens." The old farmer said, "Then we start now." The ghost looked at the horizon again. His face stayed calm, but inside he knew what this meant. The moment he began training these people, the Empire would brand this colony as rebels. They would send more troops, more weapons, maybe even burn the entire planet if they had to. But he also knew something else. The Empire had made a mistake tonight. They had shown the people they could bleed. And once people saw that, they stopped being afraid. The ghost walked toward the burned remains of an armored vehicle. He pulled out a map from the dead commander's pack, spreading it on the hood of the wreck. "Here," he said, pointing to the nearby hills, "we'll set traps along this road. And here, we'll hide supplies, weapons, food." The farmers gathered around. The miners leaned in. Even the traders nodded firmly. Plan was forming. For the first time in years, the colony wasn't talking about hiding. They were talking about fighting back. As the sun broke weakly through the smoke, the ghost stood with them, showing them where to build defenses, where to watch the skies, where to strike if the Empire came again. Lyra stood nearby, holding Arya, watching the man who had come out of nowhere and changed everything. For the first time in a long time, she felt hope. But the ghost knew hope wasn't enough. The Empire would return with more soldiers, more weapons, maybe even warships. And when they came, they wouldn't just want the colony. They would want him, because he wasn't just a man anymore. He was the spark of rebellion, the one thing the Empire feared most.